Welcome back, everybody. In the following section called Treasures, there will be 4 topics. The first topic is project basics. The speaker is Mr. Jani Kozina, research fellow in the Research Center of the Slovenian Academy of Science and Arts. As a project manager of the AgriGo4Cities, he is responsible for the implementation of the project and coordinating the partnership. In his presentation, he will introduce the project idea and summarize the activities that have been carried out in the project. Please, Mr. Kozina, give your talk.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear speakers, dear urban gardeners, dear fighters for urban development, dear representatives of vulnerable and marginalized groups. I'm delighted to stand here before all of you. During the last 2 years, I think that our partnership achieved some remarkable results, and I'm very satisfied that I can present you this project now when the things are coming together. My role is here to give you some contextual background, how did the idea appear and why we are sitting here. The whole story started around 600 years ago when the territories that we are living now in, the countries, our cities, belong to the common empire. So the people lived together, but there was an emperor and there was not participatory planning and similar collaborative practices in the area. That's changed, people got rid of the emperor and the new system came. The dictatorship that we had continued the practices or even intensified them. But nowadays, we have another macro region, another territorial framework, and we have a Danube region strategy. In opposition to the previous practices, this strategy and this framework provides an opportunity for participatory planning, for people to be the first on the forefront of all the actions within our cities and our countries. Regarding the legacy of this macro region, our partnership identified 3 common problems that are related with decreasing capacities of public administration to integrate participatory approach into decision-making processes. The second one is the social exclusion aspect. If you're familiar with the numbers, 30% of people that are considered as marginalized and vulnerable are living in the Danube region. So there is a high demand to work towards these sections, to empower people, to bring them on the equal position. And the third one is related to unsustainable urban development. The industrialization processes, the vacant lands are present in our cities, so there is another need to work towards this area to make our cities greener, more comfortable, and more user-friendly, if I may say so. On the other hand, a common distinction, a common characteristic of this area is that the informal food production is very high in this region compared to the western and the northern territories. And when we checked the website of the International Network for Urban Agriculture, they did a mapping of urban agricultural practices. We noticed that the Danube strategy is actually a gray spot on the map of Europe. We went a bit further. We scanned the European projects in the last 2 financial perspectives, and we searched for projects that are directly addressing urban agriculture. Very interesting observation. The Danube region is significantly less represented on the map of Europe. So there is a need for projects like AgriGo4Cities to take off in this area. So our ambition was to employ participatory, to employ urban agriculture with an aim to achieve wider societal goals, especially participation and social inclusion. This was at the forefront. So our question was, can we use urban agriculture to bring people together, to make a common decision-making, to empower them, to give them voice, to have a sense of belonging? Can they have an influence? Can we, through urban agriculture, bring Europe closer to citizens? Can we do that by European funding? Those are the main issues. So, actually, urban gardening, urban agriculture, urban farming are perceived in this project as a tool to achieve wider societal goals. We want to increase capacities of public administrations, we want to empower citizens, and we want to make our cities better. So, three specific objectives related to participation, to social inclusion, and to sustainable urban development. So how did all the idea started to happen? It was now already 4 years ago when almost 600 applications were submitted within the first call of project of the Danube region, and our project was one among 10% of those successful selected ideas. And the partnership, we are already very proud on that results. So the project started, for those that are not familiar with the basics, in the beginning of 2017, and it will end in the near future. So the total budget is 1.5 million, and we have 11 project partners, full project partners, and 6 associated strategic partners that are acting as observers and are promoting, especially on the national levels, which is a relevant level in our countries. This is the general structure of our work plan. My most trusted colleagues will go into details when explaining the main results of our work plan. I will just give a general brief outlook from the coordinating position. So the common methodology, it was actually about 3 things. It was learning, learning, and learning. Actually, the whole process was meant to empower ourselves, our partnership, and our stakeholders to know how to do a participation process, to know how to do the urban gardening, and to know how to approach vulnerable and marginalized groups, which have a very specific and distinctive needs. So, when I can tell you one anecdote, when we are discussing who are actually the vulnerable and marginalized groups, we actually found out that these are all people except white, male, well-educated, and with a good job. So actually, every other people are considered with special needs that must be taken into consideration when dealing such projects. So these are some highlights, how we did the stuff, how we did the workshops, how we did the modeling, how we did the common learning. We organized 6 study visits. The last one will be implemented tomorrow in the Székesfehérvár. For those that still didn't apply, you can have a chance to join us. We had a fantastical 2-day intense transnational training course in Munich, where we were actually close together, and we learned a lot. And how did Mr. Palmieri said, we got our shoes dirty. We went on the terrain, we went on the field. We also tried to do it by ourselves. We stepped into the shoes of those that are practicing urban agriculture. And we did it with full efforts and with all the enjoyment included. With all the knowledge generated through the learning interaction phases, we went to our 6 pilot cities, where we established 6 local partnerships consisted from politicians, decision makers, from vulnerable groups or representative of vulnerable groups, and of other interested stakeholders. So those that are not on the one or another side, but are interested in the topics addressed by the AgriGo4Cities. And the task of those partnerships was to develop an action plan and to implement an existing or to start a new urban agricultural project. So in 6 pilot cities, we established participatory urban gardens. And since we didn't want to finish our project and our initiatives by sticking the shovel into the ground, we are also thinking beyond the project's time frame by developing also 6 follow-up local plans, how to continue with our ideas, how to make a scaling, eventually leading to systemic change, and how to transfer these ideas also to other areas. Because urban agriculture, I repeat myself, is here understood just as a tool, but we can transfer this approach also to other sectors of urban domain, to, I don't know, transport, energy, and housing, and I don't know how many of them there are. But it is doable, it is transferable, and this is important, that we don't make something in isolation, but that we stick it to other sectors. And now we are in this last phase of the project, when we want to bring all the knowledge from this research, theoretical, educational phase, combined by the real experience from the pilots, to the, again, back to the transnational level. So one of the most obvious things is to organize transnational conference where all the relevant stakeholders are present. You all received the transnational governance plan, and the main results will be transmitted through various channels to those people that should hear and be addressed and targeted by the project results. So the partnership, we would like you to be today our eyes and our ears, and tomorrow our mouth and our hands when going back to your colleagues, to your co-workers, to your families, and we would really like you to transmit the results and the ideas generated through the AgriGo4Cities. To finish off, I would refer to Confucius. If your plan is for 1 year, plant rice. If your plan is for 10 years, plant trees. If your plan is for 100 years, educate children. Well, Confucius was a very wise man. We must admit that. But we went beyond the state of the art by emphasizing that if your plan is for 2.5 years, apply for European funding by writing an appealing project proposal. So we tried to do that, and I hope you will like the result. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and to make myself even clearer, I would like to ask the technicians to present the project video that was one of the deliverables within the project. So enjoy the performance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr.
It always starts with a start, an idea, a gesture, a word, a person. It always starts with a start, an idea, a gesture, a small degraded piece of land in the middle of the city, an object, or in our case, a small degraded piece of land in the middle of the city. Minds that believe people of all social groups, ages and ethnicities can understand the language of gardening join forces. Planting, growing, watering, caring for the soil and harvesting. Doing these things helps forge communities and therefore leads people to exchange knowledge. And so, the seeds for the AgriGo4Cities project were planted. In the last few decades, new forms of gardening and farming practices using high levels of social innovation, environmentally friendly lifestyles, and mixed bottom-up or top-down approaches have been emerging. We wanted to know more about them, so we researched, visited, and studied them, selecting the best and presented them to others. We learned about and from them, all for a good reason, for the best reason, to grow something of our own. First, we planned. When planning is participatory, we are given an opportunity to influence not only the process of what we will grow, but also why we are doing things and what changes we are striving for. That allows us to express our needs and wishes, and empowers us to take responsibility for the sustainability of the outcomes. Do not think it came naturally. We trained ourselves in action planning, as well as our thinking about systemic planning tools that are or should be available to integrate planners, practitioners, and civil society, all in a process of joint learning that can guide the development of urban agriculture more effectively. And then, doing. 6 local pilot projects to be concrete. There are at least 5 good reasons for doing urban agriculture. It brings people together to work on common projects. It provides food and income for those who need it. It significantly reduces fossil fuel consumption. It facilitates education around sustainable local agriculture and food systems. It also provides nutritious food for deprived communities. But it goes far beyond reasoning, like everything in life. While being in nature surrounded by others, doing and creating, we nurture what is humane in us. And just like that, another seed is blown to a degraded area.
So now I can thank Mr. Kozina for his talk. And our next topic is methodology of participatory urban and peri-urban agriculture. The speaker is Kaja Zung, expert associate in the Association for Culture and Education. As leader of setting up a common methodology of participatory urban agriculture, she was responsible for the development of the guidelines for the development and implementation of an action plan, and for the development and implementation of a transnational training session. In her presentation, Kaja will introduce the methodology of participatory urban and peri-urban agriculture. Please, Ms. Zung, give your talk.
Hello. As said, I'm Kaja. I come from Pina. And on behalf of AgriGo4Cities partnership, I will try to present how the project intensified cooperation of public administrators and civil society. And how I will do that is by presenting to you the 5 treasures that we didn't found, but that we created. And the first one being the good practice catalog, the second, study visits, the third, guidelines for action planning, the fourth, transnational tool for action planning, and lastly, the tutoring system. Good practices are an important source of know-how on how to establish or manage urban agriculture. The main aim of collecting those practices was to provide the ideas, and guidelines on how to design successful practice. When searching for cases, all project partners conducted research and selected few best cases based on inclusion of vulnerable groups, participatory approach, and addressing the sustainable development. In the end, we had 21 good practices that were then analyzed based on basic information like the target groups that were involved, how the gardens were established, how the stakeholders were involved, what makes a practice a good practice, how were people involved, what are potential development trajectories, what were the lessons that were learned, and what were the motivations and values of stakeholders that were included in those good practices. And what we found out that very diverse vulnerable groups were included and that they weren't initially being involved by themselves, but from NGOs. And that in reality, they have quite similar needs to those well-organized residents, and that the most successful cases joined those two and maybe other stakeholders. That building a community within these people ranks higher than gardening, and that decision makers are mostly indirectly involved. That lack of funding and temporal or unsecured plot of land threatens urban agriculture practices, and finally that urban gardens contribute to sustainability, to activation of people, and provide fresh vegetables and fruits. But we didn't just do desk research. During the last 2 years, now almost 2 years and a half, the partners were given a chance to learn from similar attempts outside their country. Through 5 study visits, tomorrow, as we heard, we'll have the 6th one, we gained first-hand experience in 5 different countries. In Alania, Slovenia, Prague, Czech Republic, Blagoevgrad, Bulgaria, Munich, Germany, and Banska Bystrica, Slovakia. The study visits provided insights into local initiatives and practices. They enabled knowledge exchange between AgriGo4Cities expert groups and pilot regions and offered a chance for a constructive debate. But more than that, they filled us with this energy that we want to do something, that we also want to create, plan, and do our own actions and pilots. And they were inspirational and motivational in that sense. But to do that, we realized that what we need is a really concrete plan of how to actually create those action plans and try and test pilot actions. With that, we believe that by providing guidelines for the development and implementation of action, it is possible to improve the capacity for public administrators to involve relevant stakeholders and civil society in governance and public participation through the means of urban agriculture. So we did just that. But as a start, we decided that a successful participatory urban agriculture is actually a social innovation. And once we established that connection, it was easy to design a process of action planning because we just used 6 steps of social innovation and adapt it to urban participatory agriculture. There are the 6 steps, the first one being the diagnosis. That is the foundation for all further phases, since understanding the issue is the key. In the case of participatory urban agriculture, 3 areas of diagnosis were proposed. The first is the social circumstances of the target groups. The second is the relationship between stakeholders and their neighborhood and communities. And the last one, the special dimension of the area that we will use for the urban agriculture. The second phase is the ideation phase. It demands revising, refining the concept. It includes analysis of what could be achieved according to the constraints pointed out. And this is important, constraints always exist, but then also to find the best attempt, an optimum solution for such constraints. The third phase, prototyping, allows to gather feedback from a lot of different users while we are still in planning and designing the urban participatory agriculture. The fourth, monitoring phase, is written here, defines the success because it effectively implements and achieves the goals of participatory urban agriculture. During monitoring, we collect analyze data about the ongoing activities in order to really get the feedback, the information about the work that we are doing and that has to be done. We can then scale participatory urban agriculture by influencing, for example, raising awareness about social issues. Now we had a really big climate protest, yeah? Through direct approach of replication, for example, if one plot works, let's build new, let's develop new location. And dissemination, event like this is a really great example of that. Participatory urban agriculture is a process, it's not a project. And if it's successful, there is opportunity to scale and increase the number of users upon whom it has an impact. And if we are lucky and smart enough, a vision of the six, the final step can emerge, the systemic change, a long-term vision that goes really, really far beyond just growing vegetables. All this is joined in this lovely publication that you can also get outside, but not now, wait for the end. In this, there are included various types of systemic planning tools which are available to integrate you as planners, practitioners, civil society organization representative in a process of joint learning that can effectively guide the development of urban agriculture. The chapters include reasons for urban agriculture, inclusion of marginalized groups, and participatory planning. They also define the role of social innovation in this segment. In the future chapters, each phase of action planning is in detail presented, along with concrete planning tools and a good practice example, so you can know what works and what doesn't. The publication also includes short takeaways from all chapters and types of urban gardeners for further understanding. The final element of the publication you can see is the urban agricultural canvas, which was developed to support the action planning process. But then we didn't just want to stop with the book that creates a possibility for you to learn how to action plan, but we wanted to prepare within the project various stakeholders, decision makers, public servants, NGO representatives, researchers for action planning. And that is why we organized and prepared a transnational tour for action planning and implemented it in a form of two-day transnational training session that happened in Munich on 21st and 22nd November. I had to check the date, it was in 2017, I couldn't believe. Because participation is at the core of the project and partnership, we wanted to invite all the partners to together jointly create this tool. And they proposed lectures, provided us lectures' names, the topics, the bios, and so on. And then a special voting scale was created that enabled each organization to grade lectures based on their needs and interest. And best graded lectures were actually included in the training session. And once we had them, the program can be created and developed. And we aimed at two things. First, to acquire the understanding of participatory urban agriculture and to develop skills for action planning with multi-stakeholders involved in the process. And all that by using well-known participatory methods in the training session itself, such as brainstorming, open floor, Augusto Boal's Tirtoro do Praise, and design thinking methods. The training session was developed not just as a one-time piloting, but as a training tool that can be used by all of you. As such, transformed and reshaped into any needed form. And all training session steps are collected in the second publication that I think it's also outside, but don't go for that one just now neither. And in the publication, you will find final version of the program, a short summary of all the lectures that were involved or included with the relevant further reading recommendation list, a step-by-step explanation of all the exercise that was used on the training, and all handouts that were created and handed out during the training session. In case you do not get a copy of the book now, both books are available on AgriGo4Cities official project website under the publication sector, and you can always download them. But now, if we went from being inspired to do things on our own and now being really equipped with the technique of how to do it, we wanted to help territorial partners when they will implement the action plans, create them, and then transform them into a form of reality, a constant professional support for the development and implementation of those plans. And strategic partners nominated its own professionals that were responsible for particular step of before mentioned 6 steps of the action plan development and then implementation. And during the tutoring program, 3 types of activities have been carried out: group guidance, individual consultancy, and surveys. The purpose of it all was to generate a new participatory governance model and manage or create a new urban garden through the active involvement and cooperation of multi-stakeholders. I hope that with next work package presentation, you will see that we not only successfully achieved that, but many other things. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Tsung. The next issue is application of participatory urban and peri-urban agriculture. The talk is given by Nela Halilovic, consultant for EU projects at Municipality of Alania. In the project, she coordinated the partnership during the development of the action plans of participatory urban agriculture. Nela will present the process, how the partners developed and implemented local action plans in the framework of the pilots. Please, Ms. Halilovic, give your talk.
Dear all, it is a pleasure to be here and to have an opportunity to present you the application of participatory planning approach in project AgriGo4Cities. I am Nela Halilovic, representing one of the project partners in project, Municipality of Alania, who led the activity of action planning. First, I will talk about the implementation of participative and inclusive approach, and later I will give you the brief presentation of the outcomes of each territorial partner. So, as Kaya already said, we set the common methodology at transnational level, which was tested due to preparation and implementation of the action plans. Territorial partners then had to set the local partnerships with, mainly with organizations who are working with vulnerable groups, and together with them, then we prepared and implemented action plans through the participatory approach. Everything happened with the constant help of strategic partners through the tutoring program. The action plans were prepared with reference to guidelines and suggested methodology, and the book with guidelines was really good frame to follow, but each partner had to adjust it to local conditions. Before ideation, the phase of analysis was held on the basis on inventory report, ex-ante evaluation based on questionnaires, and other statistical data. Due to ideation, we got together with stakeholders at first participatory workshop, where we exchanged the ideas and the vision about the future pilot actions. Prototyping was done with at least 2 more participatory workshops with stakeholders and with special focus on vulnerable groups, whose input was main part of it. Vulnerable groups, as future users of the gardens, share their ideas about how it should look like, what should we see, etc. And the line between those 3 phases was really blurred. And also goes with monitoring and scaling, because those phases were part of ongoing process through other phases, as we evaluated each step carefully and adjusted it to the process. Phase of systemic change, or also called as endless phase, goes beyond the gardens, as we implemented or try to implement and will implement the lessons from action planning to change the system, to increase the participation and inclusion of marginalized groups. Development of action plans was the core issue of pilot actions. Public administrators at one side capitalized knowledge gained in transnational environment due to trainings, and on the flip side, at the same time, communities at risk of exclusion got the chance to participate in planning process. At one point, top-down and bottom-up approach met, aiming to learn how to design a new governance model in each pilot area. The tool for all of this was setting a new garden or managing the existing one. And as part of participative and inclusion approach, in 6 areas together we conducted 21 participatory workshops and reached almost 400 people from different vulnerable groups. And based on reporting, 20 different methods were used from the guidelines, and all of this is resulting in 3 new gardens established in last year. 1 is establishing right now, and 2 more that are going to get alive really soon. And now the outcomes. First, I will present the work done of our hosts at this conference, Hungarian partners from Székesfehérvár. They have done 3 workshops, used 9 methods to get the ideas from students with learning and behavioral difficulties, and together they built from scratch urban garden last year, which we will have a chance to see tomorrow due to 6th study visit. Partners from Blagoevgrad in Bulgaria, they have done 3 workshops, and with 8 methods approach to elderly and children with special needs, with whom they built their Peri-Urban garden we had a chance to see in last October. In Prague, Czech Republic, they have done 3 workshops, and with 8 methods approach to elderly and children with special... They have conducted 3 workshops and used 5 methods from the guidelines and built the urban community garden with main focus on single moms and children from nearby kindergarten. And in Ulcin, Montenegro, they performed 3 workshops and brought together the ideas from different stakeholders and children from primary school with focus on Albanian minority there. And a few days ago, they just started building together their urban garden. And partners from Vaslui, Romania, they performed 3 workshops and used 6 methods to get information from elderly people and children with focus on kids from minorities. Altogether, they set the plans for their urban garden, and the work for establishing their garden is in progress right now and will be established really soon. And of course, I saved the best for the last to present you the participatory planning approach in Municipality of Alania, Slovenia. We have done 6 workshops with different vulnerable groups and got the participation of more than 150 people. Based on input we got at the workshops, we decided to adjust the first plans, and we will establish 1 new community garden and upgrade some existing practices of urban gardening in organizations who are working with vulnerable groups. And right now we are working on the grand opening of our garden, which will happen on 24th of April, where all of you are kindly invited. And to conclude this presentation, not only pilot actions, also action planning contributed to fulfillment of projects' main objectives: to improve public capacities, to increase social and economical inclusion of vulnerable groups, and to sustainable development of rural and urban and peri-urban areas. All of territorial partners put a lot of effort into action planning in pilot actions, and each of us started from different point with really different background. So also our lessons are different. We learned a lot from each other and from our own experiences. And we set up follow-up activities so the sustainability of project results is ensured. And with aim of integrating all the knowledge we got during this process, we wrote down our experiences in transnational governance plan you have in your goodie bags. So thank you for listening.
Ms. Halilovic, thank you for your talk. The last issue in this section is policy recommendations. The talk will be given by Máté Szalók, project manager at the Central Transdanubian Regional Innovation Agency. He is responsible for transferring the knowledge and the experience gathered in the project. In this activity, he coordinated the development of the Transnational Governance Plan, which he will present in the next minutes. He will also summarize the main lessons learned during the implementation of the AgriGo4Cities project. Please, Mr. Szalók, give your talk.
Thank you very much, dear guests. My name is Máté Szalók, and I have the privilege to present our results and takeover messages after my dear colleagues. My presentation will be based on two main parts. First, I will present the developed policy recommendations and takeaway messages from the project. And then the second part, I will present the governance plan that was developed with joint effort in the partnership. So first, let's start with policy recommendations. When I prepared this part, I used the two different approach and two different sources. First of all, I used the ex-ante evaluation of participatory urban agriculture in pilot areas, which I would say has more strategic focus. And with doing surveys with the main target groups, decision makers, representatives of vulnerable groups, and other stakeholders, which I mean the NGOs and civic associations, three main points were identified. First of all, that provision of land and continuous funding is a key in successful urban agriculture. I would like to emphasize the land use policies of the cities. If they dedicate vacant land, unused land for urban agriculture, and also small but continuous support for these kind of activities, a great success can be achieved. Secondly, I would emphasize the role of knowledge and information. Participatory urban agriculture is still a new phenomenon in the Danube region. And to employ and implement it effectively, we must spread the knowledge and raise awareness among our target groups about the main advantages and benefits of urban agriculture. And thirdly, I would say that urban gardens and urban gardening goes far beyond the physical activity of gardening. Urban gardens can serve meeting points for the local community. Small-scale forums, neighborhood planning actions can be done in these kind of gardenings. And it will the friendly and well-known environment could facilitate the engagement of the neighborhood and other representatives. And I would like to go to more to the practical part, and I would like to summarize the lessons learned during implementing the pilot actions. And what are the key elements and factors of success? First of all, continuous learning and development of skills. In this point, I would like to emphasize learning from each other about new methods and approaches, and learning about each other, learning about the needs of our target groups, and also about their skills, what they can bring into the process. Second point is the communication. Many partners emphasize that the biggest success for them in the pilot action was that actually the vulnerable groups, decision makers and NGOs sat down together and started to discuss and started to plan together. However, in communication, one must keep in mind the different needs of our target groups. Each target groups must be addressed according to their needs. And in this point, I would like to emphasize the role of the face-to-face meetings. Now I'm arriving to friendly environment, which really could have the involvement of the stakeholders. Most of the AgriGo4Cities partners organized the workshops in the facilities of our vulnerable and marginalized groups, and friendly environment could really facilitate their commitment and engagement in the project. However, when talking about friendly environment, they used the language and not just the physical environment, but also the whole atmosphere. The role of the friendly atmosphere must be emphasized. As I said previously, participatory urban agriculture is still a recent phenomenon. To introduce it to the participants of a planning process, we must capitalize existing good practices and build on their success and adapt them to our project. Secondly, in the second slide, I put first maintaining trust, because gaining trust is important, but maintaining it, maybe it has even more importance. And this can be, according to our experiences, achieved two ways. One is the continuous communication between the leaders of participatory planning process and between the participants, and to show them the outputs, validate the outputs, and to ask for their feedback. And secondly, show them the results, show our capability to realize their ideas, and try to deliver these results relatively a short time, even if these kind of results are a small case at the beginning. Participatory approach in every phase is also important, not just in planning, but with inviting the participants to take part in the establishment of the garden, to work in them physically, could increase their commitment to our project and to our goals. For effective participation, we must highlight the forms. Decision makers and municipalities deal easier with an association, especially when talking about the legal aspects of urban gardening. This is one advantage to establish a gardening association that takes care about the garden. But on the other hand, the gardeners, which are in many cases members of vulnerable groups, could learn how to work together in an association, how to debate things together. And as last point, I would like to emphasize that participatory planning is a complex process. It has many stakeholders, many participants. Sometimes the goals and the people could change during the ideation and during developing the common concept. But even though this is more difficult than just by implementing a project by the municipality, let's say, the results will compensate at the end. And now we'll arrive to the second part of my presentation, which I would like to introduce the Transnational governance plan, which, as was said before, you all received in your bags. Three of us edited with Yanni, who is present here, with Csaba, who is doing his PhD about urban agriculture and unfortunately cannot be present, and by me. But all the AgriGo4Cities partners contributed to the governance plan. So it is really the result of the common effort and the joint result of the partnership. And it summarizes all the knowledge and experience that was gathered in the project. It has an introduction, what needs and challenges were addressed by the project, and an introduction to the project, how we try to address these needs and challenges. It describes the concept of participatory urban agriculture, also the lessons learned from study visits and from good practices. It also summarizes our common methodology and the three main tools, such as the guidelines, the tutoring program, and the transnational training session. And it also summarizes the implemented pilot actions. And now we try to develop the conclusion and the takeaway messages. It will be available online on the AgriGo4Cities webpage. And in the last 3 months of the project, it will be translated all the national languages of the partnership. So feel free to check it online and share it and read it, because this is our main publication, what summarizes almost 2.5 years' work. Now I would like to say thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Mr. Solo. Good Seed is the title of the next part, and we can learn about good practices from Danube. We have 3 speakers for this topic. First, Donna Picard, an assistant professor at the Institute for the Study of Societies and Knowledge at the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. Please, Ms. Picard, give your talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much, firstly, to the local organizers and to the coordinator of the project, and of course the Bulgarian team for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here and very honored as well, and it's a great pleasure to be in such diverse expertise of people. Now, before I start, let me just make a couple of notes. The first one is that coming from a research institution, I'm used to listening from researchers. I would like to see representative data coming from good evidence, good database, and so on. I'm not going to base my presentation today on such type of data, because in urban agriculture research, it's really difficult to find such research. It's really fragmented. Because it's such a multifaceted subject. You've got researchers from different disciplines doing very much case-based studies. Urban agriculture being such a local phenomenon, it does not yield generalizable data most of the time. Still, as we have seen today, there are a lot of things that we see in many different cultural settings, different local settings. We do see that urban agriculture is a good thing, very generally said. Now, we do have a problem with how we can make it really inclusive. So this is the topic today. Now, I don't see a lot of excluded people here. I don't see a lot of Roma, a lot of disabled, and don't take it as a criticism to the organizers, because I know the reason why this is so. And I think during my presentation, I will actually try to give an answer why that is. And this is also the reason why it is so difficult to implement true social inclusion as citizenship participation through urban agriculture. So this is the logic of my presentation today. I have been working on urban agriculture from a sociologist point of view. I'm a rural sociologist. This is my basic work, but I have been looking at urban agriculture from the point of view of the interaction between bottom-up citizenship, participation, points of view, needs, and the top-down perspective in general. So what are the cleavages? What are the opportunities for development is something that I will try to present in about 20 minutes. And also, don't be alarmed that a lot of what I will say will sound pessimistic, but it's not. It's actually a way to focus on the problems so that we are better equipped to solve them. And this is why, at the end, I will finish with some successful strategies that have proven to truly contribute to real inclusion. So let's start with the bottom-up perspective. When we talk about the participation of civil actors, it's really important to understand that community is not one thing. We have seen in previous presentations that actually in one community itself there are conflicting interests. We saw this in the presentation of the Hungarian presenter. who showed us that chit-chattering was actually not very pleasant for the neighboring community. So really, I would like to quote the author Einstein, who is also quoted in one of your reports, that citizenship participation is like eating spinach. Generally, nobody is against it. Everybody says that's quite a good thing. But when it comes to practice, what do we do with that? So who do we want to integrate? Who is excluded? And who participates in urban agriculture? How can we link those who partake and those whose needs we really need to or we want to address with policies? Firstly, the obvious subject that we've been talking about this today are the so-called the have-nots, the generally disadvantaged groups, the vulnerable groups, those who, not so much in Europe, this is more a problem of developed countries, don't have access to good food, maybe don't have access to fresh food, although there is quite a large percent of people living in risk of poverty in Europe, but generally this is not the main problem in Europe, but more so people who are excluded from the job market, who don't really have access to participate in political decision-making process. So how can we integrate them? Now, there are quite a tricky group to integrate because, firstly, they don't have easy access to urban agriculture activities. Firstly, because very often they don't have time. As you are aware, most of European people who are poor are actually working poor. These are not, we're not talking only about the people who laze around on social aid. These are people who work 2, sometimes 3 jobs, so they really don't have the time to go and invest in this work. Also, urban agriculture is an activity that takes investment in time. It's not, you've got to plant the seed, wait, and sometimes they don't have to. They really need immediate solutions to their problems. Secondly, many of them are not aware of their rights. They have little awareness. Many of our research across, I work mainly in Bulgaria, but generally across our research in Europe, often they're not aware of places where they can practice. And when they are, there is very often low motivation. I will come to that when I come to the NGOs, who do a lot of good work, but a lot of time they've got a problem with trust. So many times, people who could be involved and they would have good advantage of being involved in urban agriculture activities don't see an NGO activity as being directed at their needs. They see, oh, it's another project that they want to fund. Well, that's their business. So the next group, which at least in southeastern European countries, it's growing, with all the conditions about this term, I understand that. I'll call them the middle class. Now, we can discuss in the break what that means, but generally these are the people who are well-educated, well-placed professionally, with good social status. Oftentimes, they do what they do with the aim to help the poor, with the aim to produce something, give out free food baskets, for example. And then also they say, oh, if you do surveys with them, they say, we do it because of the social inclusion. We feel more included. We feel like we are developing community. But when you do deeper biographical interviews with them, for example, you see that they're already included before they started doing urban agriculture. They're so well networked. So this is what social capital is all about. The circular. You reproduce social capital. It's very easy to be included when you already are well networked and connected. Also, as I said, when they want to help disadvantaged communities, they're often seen as outsiders who don't understand the needs of the poor. So they're not very easily trusted. But one good thing is that they usually they liaise very well with local authorities. So they have got this ability to formulate problems, to also suggest solutions, to show the political elite that something could be done. Another two actors, they are kind of squeezed at the end, but they are very important. The first one is the early institutions, early education institutions and schools that have really shown that when they do have the resources, they are very, they've got very good potential to instill environmentally aware practices, responsible consumer, everything that is to do with thinking long term. And also, they can teach useful practical skills to children. Such an example, we do have a school for deaf children in Sofia, who a few years ago started an organic garden. And children are taught gardening skills. They're also taught cooking skills in the kitchen. So as long as there are regulations that allow this type of work, because actually there are a lot of difficulties with that, I'll come back to that, they do have great potential to help. Now, as I said, NGOs are a very important actor in linking these grassroots communities or individual participants with policies that can help social integration. Now, there is one big problem with NGOs, and that is that they mostly work with external finances and funds that they come and end. There is a project period, and research across Europe has shown that generally they are less sustainable in the long run compared to true grassroots initiatives that self-finance, that bring up resources in between themselves. And this is because people who are involved in these projects, they don't feel the ownership of the projects when it's externally financed. Sometimes we hear across different gardens that have been funded in this way is that, well, after the project has finished, they say, now we don't know what to do and how to do it. Because if we do it our way, it will contradict the initial idea maybe. So it's on the brink of rationality and feeling guilty. So we really have to be careful there. So out of these four actors, the ones that I think we would all agree that we want to include most are the first group, but on the other hand, they're the least capable to do so. How do we change that? What are the possibilities? Well, one of my not theory, but kind of statement, is that in those countries and cities where there aren't centralized urban agricultural food policies, and most of European countries and cities are like that, there is very little that can be done, because the poor people, let's call them the poor people, disadvantaged people, it's very difficult for them to lift themselves up because they don't have the social capacity to do so. On top, there is nothing to lift them up. And we've got the NGOs in the middle that are very important, but sometimes they are limited from the point of view of resources and time span of what they do. So here, I think, is the answer, the beginning of the answer that I started at the beginning. Why are those people not here? We talk about participation, but they don't participate here. So why don't they participate in policies? Isn't democracy, aren't we all democratic systems and political democratic systems? What's missing? And when it comes to urban agriculture, the problem is that it's a very, very local thing. It's geographically local, it's problem local. We have important representatives from European and international institutions. The policies that they implement and not policies that are relevant to the problems of urban agriculture. Because the biggest problems with urban agriculture are firstly related to social policies, and social policy, like education policy in Europe, is one of the most, the least general. You know, there isn't one European social policy. There isn't one European education policy like there is the CAP. So we're coming down very local, and there is no also one national urban agriculture policy. It's impossible. So it's a very, very political question that we're talking about. I hate to say that, but it is. I don't have time for these examples. So I will come now to the political side. I think we do have political representatives from local authorities, do we? Yes. So I really, really want to say I've been working with local authorities in Bulgaria, and I know that they're very good people, and they want to promote urban agriculture, but they've got a lot of restrictions to do that. Firstly, as the gentleman from the Mr. Benoit, he already underlined the way the sectoral policies that actually cut across the issues of urban agriculture are very separated. It's difficult to bring them together. And also in a small municipality where you've got the political staff, the administrative staff, a lot of different things to deal about, they don't have time and capacity to come together in cross-sectoral groups and discuss things. Or when they do, they do it in a way that solves a very small problem. Of course, they do have budget restrictions, and most importantly, they lack understanding of the need of urban agriculture and the benefits from it. And that is not because they're stupid. That is because the people who most need it, they do not have this capacity to problematize. They do not come together to identify that they've got a common problem, there is a common solution, and they don't have the capacity to lobby. That's why it is a social, also it is a political problem. So just the same way that no country has come to the European Commission to say, let's integrate urban agriculture into the next strategy or in the next planning period. This is not happening because there is nobody at the ground to push for that. So it's it's good that we're all here knowing that this is an important issue, but unless we turn it into a political issue, it's not going to happen. Now, apart from those very structural problems, there are a few very local problems that I think are the same across most European countries, that even when there is goodwill on the political side to introduce policies that are socially inclusive, there are many little things that interfere. First one is land rights and policies. Here there are a lot of interests that contradict. What do we do with restituted property after 89? Private property coming back to private hands, but it's designated for green area. So on one hand, it's my private property. On the other hand, I can't do much with it, so shall I lease it to urban farmers or not? This is something that the local authorities need to decide, and they don't want to meddle with that because it's too sensitive. Private rights, social needs. How do you balance it? Very politically delicate, sensitive problem. Food safety regulation, big issue. As I said, the school for deaf children. What they're doing at the moment, cooking their own vegetables in their kitchen, is illegal. Because the food safety agency says that you've got to be registered at least with 4 different regulations, under 4 different regulations in Bulgaria to be able to cook for children. So at the moment they do it, they tolerate it, but in practice it's illegal. Veterinary permissions. If you want to be an urban beekeeper, it's very tough. You really, really have to go through a few, again, procedures that are quite heavy. God forbid somebody got stung by your bees. Of course, they can't prove it's your bee, but... and again, another very, very difficult problem is access to water. Water in Bulgaria, for example, is increasingly water sources are privatized. But traditionally they've been available to the community. So how do you deal with that? How do you get permission is again very difficult problem. Not to be so pessimistic, and coming back to my thesis that we really have to give tools into the hands of those who need to get access to political rights, who need to get access to the economic decision process, a political decision process, is really to make them aware that they're not alone. Their problems are shared across a larger community, and it's in their hands to come together and fight for those. And I will show you a few examples. Actually, they're not examples, they're categories of examples. And this will be the final, almost final slide. So the way people have been succeeding across Europe, and especially in America and Canada, I would like to see it along two types of spectra. One is along the spectrum of cooperation and confrontation with the local authorities. And when I talk about confrontation, I don't necessarily mean direct confrontation, but generally going against the principles that are instigated by local authorities. And the second spectrum is how much they engage. I think you will understand as I explain. So starting with one of the most successful strategies and one of the longest, because as we said, community transformation and policy transformations are long processes. The first one is creation and co-design of policies for inclusion. And when we say creation and co-design, this means true engagement of all stakeholders, including disadvantaged ones, from day one. We want them to say what their problems are and what their needs are, together with liaising partners and also the local authorities. This has been happening very much in developing countries, and this multi-actor approach is one that the RUAF, probably most of you are aware of this organization. It's the RUAF, maybe you should call it, that develop urban agriculture for inclusion and poverty alleviation programs across the world. This is what they do, and they've been proving over the past decades that it's happening. But problem is that you've got to wait, and you've got to be perseverant, not just sit and wait. Another very much cooperative with local authorities approach is to offer them help to develop UA strategies. This might not be directly working with them, but you can send them ideas. You can warm them up. You can they've got to become sensitive to these issues. You've got to really have this to become visible to them, so that your problems become visible to them. So this has been happening also across, especially in Bulgaria, it's been happening over the past few years. Civil organizations who want to be seen as cooperating, they don't come in confrontation, but they say, okay, you don't have time, we'll do it for you. And it's been working wonders. Of course, when it's been done, let me just do, how much more time do I have? Is it, no, 2 minutes? Great. Let me just go back to this. This was actually a bad example of how an NGO, how the civil society comes in cooperation with the local authority. What they did is they said, okay, we've got to give the poor knowledge where they can practice, because they recognize that people don't know where they can do it. So what they did it was actually last year, over a very long process of editions and re-editions, they created this map of Sofia's potential areas for urban agriculture. It's very sophisticated. It's interactive. I don't know how to create videos for presentations, so I can't show it to you, but then I would have wasted more time here. But for each spot, you can see everything. You can see how deep underwater sources are, how far surface water sources are, what type of zoning area is this, whose property it is. They even have how far from cultural heritage spot this is. But this is not really something that, that people who really need this information would use. They don't know about the site. They don't have time to look at look at it. This thing at the up here, these are all the filters. It's difficult for me to understand them, and I got a PhD. Not that it means much, but it's difficult. So this is one example of something that's not that practical. Although it's very good for a lot of other actors. But we're talking about social inclusion here. Then going more to the right of the spectrum towards confrontation is engaging activities that can be seen as giving back. This means, okay, we want something from you, and then we give you something back. This is, for example, just to make it clear, for example, a group of female rights activists may say, okay, we understand that we want things that probably are difficult for you to give us, but then we'll give you back. For example, we will produce food for orphans. So it's a kind of trade-off. And then very interesting, and I like this strategy because it's a little bit of foot in the door one, making the space political. If you occupy a space or are allowed to tolerate to use it, and if you try and link it to activities that are seen as politically acceptable, for example, fighting for minority rights, it's very difficult for somebody to come and evict you. Because, for example, last time I read about a garden in Chicago that runs an after-school program for black children, which deals with black political power. Now, the private owner wants to evict them, and there has been a big uprisal because it's seen as a blow to black political power. So quite an interesting strategy. And lastly, occupation. This is type of guerrilla gardens, quarter gardens. This is quite controversial because you may say it's actually quite capsulating. It's not inclusive, it's exclusive. But sociologically speaking, that's not quite right, because you can have quite a well-knit little community that through this activity will be more able to self-help. So they will manage to solve some problems. So that is also one option. So to conclude, one recommendation is not to see the different actors as enemies, or if you see them as enemies, try and step into their shoes, see all the problems they are faced, especially citizenship groups are very, very demanding of local authorities. They should be so, but also they should be aware of everything that local authorities are faced with, and maybe some cooperation and help will go a long way. And of course, they do have more goals that they want to admit most of the times. As I said, it's a long work, but we shouldn't give up. And very, very importantly, social capital is not something that, at least research has shown, that it's very easily planted. That video you made was beautiful, but those seeds that come down and then come, it's a lot more difficult than that, and we should be aware of that. Lastly, as it was already said, we really have to have equal standing of all actors that are involved. So I'll leave you with that, and yeah, maybe next time we have more representatives of those who we want to include as equal standing representation. Thank you.
Ms. Picard, thank you for your talk. Our second speaker is Rudolf Schicker, coordinator of the Danube Strategy Point. Please, Mr. Schicker, give your talk.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to give a speech at your conference. I won't speak about Danube strategy anymore. I did that this morning, but I used to be a politician in the city of Vienna some years ago, and therefore I would like to bring some ideas that might be helpful for the AgriGo4Cities. Therefore, I will show you some historical experiences and the recent development in the city of Vienna. Just to remind you, the city of Vienna is the capital of Austria, is a city close to the Danube. Mostly it's said it's the city on the Danube, but that's not right. The center of the city is far away from the Danube. And the inhabitants have, was very volatile during the last 100 years. We had some 2.1 million inhabitants after World War I, less than 1.5 million inhabitants in the 80s. And again, nowadays, we have some 2 million inhabitants. Vienna in 1919, after World War I, was known for hunger, tuberculosis, also called as Vienna disease, and rachitis. In 1981, Vienna was rather a boring old city on the western side of the Iron Curtain. And back and nowadays, it's the 10th year ranked city of the highest living standards, and it's prosperous. We have 1 million people employed in the city of Vienna, but 10.4% unemployed, and the gross regional product per capita per year is 48,600 euros. So it's a wealthy population, or a wealthy city, but there are pockets of poor people in the city as well. We have some 200,000 students in the city, and 1/3 of Viennese inhabitants are not of Austrian citizenship. So that's something very different to capital cities further to the east from Vienna. So, and we have 1 million houses, flat dwellings, so for 2 million inhabitants. Getting to the greener part of the city. Back in 1905, the Viennese Green Belt, the Woods and Meadow Belt, was created because Vienna was growing towards the Vienna Woods. And politicians in those days thought it's a good idea to protect the Vienna Woods, not only with the walls, well known, but also by protecting them for further urban sprawl. In 1984, the flood protection Danube Island was built. So we have a flood protection for the city for the thousands, only one time in 1,000 years occurring flood situation, which makes us very happy. And in 96, we got acknowledged a national park alongside the Danube, the so-called floodplains, the Donna, Aryan. And in 2005, the Vienna Woods were acknowledged as a biosphere park. And almost 50% of the Viennese surface still are open space. So water, meadows, woods, agricultural fields, parks, gardens, and so on. So that's quite a lot, and it's rather challenging in a growing city to keep these parts of the city green. So you can see the Vienna Woods to the west and north, to the east, the national park, in the middle, the Prater. The ones having been to Vienna will know that it's really a very big, very close to the city park. You can see Schönbrunn on the map, and you also see the so-called Gold Bear Mountain to the south. So keeping a city with almost 50% green is rather challenging. And we still have vineyards in the city, as you see on this picture, and we want to keep them. And we want to keep the Vienna woods. As I told you, in 1905, the Vienna woods were already protected by law. But after World War I, when we had the diseases in Vienna, no food, nothing, it's not a good picture, but living in Vienna was not so nice in those days. That was the rests of the Vienna woods in those days. So they were cut down for heating reasons or for building small dwellings like you can see in the background. So what to do? Squatters. Grassroots ideas. There were no flats, but they wanted to have something to live. They wanted to have where they can grow their crops. So there was not enough food, not enough flats, there were not enough flats, there was not enough money, and not enough work. So high unemployment rate, nothing to eat, diseases and everything. So many groups started to squat the land. Working class people, they started to squat the land, but they were used to organize themselves. So they started self-organized to build houses, plant trees, and grow their vegetables. So that really is a problem for authorities, as already was mentioned by Ms. Picard. So what was the city doing? The city was offering the squatters to legalize the ownership of the land when they are ready to organize themselves in a cooperative way. The settlers got support from the city by architects, famous architects, Loos, Frank, Schütte-Lihotzky, and professionalists. And the city was paying for these experts, for the professionals and for the architects. And the city provided material for building the houses. But the settlers had to work on building their own houses cooperatively. So they worked together, and the map for one of these settlements shows that there are small, tiny houses at the side, but there's much green in between, so that they could produce their vegetables, that they could produce their fruits. So, and that was how these settlements were built. Women had to work on this, and they had worked together with the material that was provided by the city. They had their gooses, they had their plants, but they had very nice new dwellings, new houses, built cooperatively. So they were very happy to have that. And that was working class people, and that was the result of cooperative work. Another movement that occurred in the late 80s of the 19th century was very helpful to solve the problems with producing vegetables, producing food in the city. So after World War I, former military property was transformed to Schreber Gardens, unused railway estates and open spaces owned by the city. And they were transformed to gardens, to their own private gardens. But they worked together for water supply, to get good water supply and things like that. So for my opinion, it's the first way of urban gardening as well. The same occurred after World War II, but prosperity led to a conversion of the use of these parcels. So nowadays, we have some 10,000 hectares of land as these so-called Kleingarten in Vienna, Schreber Gardens, and they have some 33,000 parcels, each of it in the average 300 square meters. But, and that's the real problem, most of the parcels are used for single housing. They grow few vegetables or fruits because they become wealthy. And it's a sort of misuse of common land. They started off with small houses. Houses became bigger. Some remained, like from the beginning, but most of them grew bigger and bigger. So actually, this was lost for urban gardening. It was a privatized public land. So starting the next generation of gardening in a city became popular in the beginning of this century, and the traditional ways still exist, but the new ways were renting gardening plots for self-harvesting, community gardening, and guerilla gardening, and then something new like the Mundraub and Fruchtfliege. I will show what it is. So the city again had the situation that there were people who wanted to crop their own vegetables, who wanted to plant their trees, but it was no room for maneuver left, besides Vienna Woods and the national parks. So a new organization was founded in 2016, the Garteln in Wien, in German, Gardening in Vienna, as a coordinating and supporting center. It's not part of the city's administration, it's sort of NGO. And city dwellers can learn where to grow their own food. The organization offers guidance in establishing garden initiatives. First steps, clarifying legal formalities, looking for the costs, identifying points of contact, and most important, to find where there is free land, and to learn how to do it, to have gardening courses for children, for disabled, and all the other technical assistance that's needed by the ones starting off doing their own gardening in a city. So people get guidance for the plants which fit to the land they use. Children get involved, school classes get involved on the gardening scene. And on the urban gardening side, in the average, the gardening plots with land owned by the city, you pay 2 euros per square meter for 1 season. It's not your own. After the season, you give back this plot, and next year, probably somebody else will grow his vegetables there. The self-harvest plots are land owned by farmers. We still have many farmers in the city of Vienna. Some 40% of vegetables distributed and sold in the city were produced within the city's boundaries. So they also offer self-harvest plots for 40 to 80 square meters, but they are a bit more expensive than the ones owned by the city. They ask 4.5 euros per square meter in the average for 1 season. So again, for the very poor, I think it's rather better to ask for gardening plots on the city side. Now, some pictures on the self-harvesting gardening plots. You may find them in many countries on the world, many cities on the world, and of course, yes, Ms. Picard is right. That is a very local issue. You can solve that on the local level with the help of the legal framework. Now, community garden, another project, many projects going on this, under this heading. People of the neighborhood are gardening together. So cooperative gardening groups have to organize themselves. They have to give them a legal framework, or cooperative, or a institution, or whatever, and and membership for use of this neighborhood gardenings is required. There has to be a valid contract with the landowner that can be organized with the help of the organization I showed at the beginning. The district authorities must be obtained, and at the moment, in each of the Viennese districts, we have 23 districts like Budapest, there's at least one of these community gardens established. And the organization gets a maximum of funding for 1 year, but only for 1 year, with 3,600 euros. And the support comes from the City of Vienna Department for Gardens and Parks. Mostly this department is in charge of the land, and on organizational issues, technical and ownership and legal issues, the Localia Agenda 21 is supporting them, and the urban renewal offices, which are established in many of the Vienna districts. So to give one example, you see this there's green in the middle of 2 roads, and people make use of it in the community gardening. Or the plant boxes, we have seen that from other cities already on the concrete, and then they have their own crops. And something very special, we also convinced the Department for Streets of the City of Vienna as cooperation partner, and you get many small, tiny bits of green which are not used properly. But if somebody is looking after it, then they have really good green, or even flowers, or the crops and bees or something else. Now, and one of the even more important project is to integrate gardening in the new flat buildings, on the top roof or in yards, and that's very much liked by people. But there are some old projects also where the trees already have grown up very high. That's a social housing flat in the south of Vienna. Now, getting to the more free organized and freelancing projects, to the self-organized initiatives, not in close cooperation with the city. And I want to show you 3 projects of that. The one is the Guerilla Gardening. You probably know because it exists in many of the cities. That's, for instance, if a small group takes, with the help of the urban renewal group, they take the squatter some 3 or 4 parking lots and start their gardening there. Mostly it's funny and people accept it. Sometimes it's rather it's not so easy to bring that through with the other neighbors, but it's a way of making people aware of the situation, how much land is used by cars in a city, and that there are much better using opportunities. And then there's something I think is very interesting, because I remember that was already existing back in the 60s in the city and the earlier decades, fruit in public space. So if you had alongside the alleys alongside the streets with cherry trees or apple trees, then the Department for Streets identified each tree, and you could buy the fruits, so you could harvest the fruits on this tree. This new way of fruit in public space is an open government data activity, because the Muntraub and Fruchtfliege, they are mainly organized on the internet. And the Mundraub, they plant their own trees, pears, whatever, and they put it on the internet where it is, so that it is identified as something that you may eat. And when you have when you get the fruits during summertime, everybody can take them, because most of people cannot eat or make jam or whatever from the fruits of one tree for their family. It's too much. So they invite the others to come and make use of it. And the second one is the so-called Fruchtfliege, fleas, fruits or something like that. And they identify where in the open space in Vienna you get different sorts of fruit trees. Whenever you identify that you want to have cherries, and it's the end of May, and you see there's a cherry tree at the old Danube, then go there and pick your cherries. It's open for everybody. Also, it's a tree on the city's land. So that's what I wanted to show you, what's going on in Vienna. It's not a the last two ones, and the guerrilla gardening, are the real grassroots projects at the moment. There is not the working class behind it, as Picard already mentioned. It's rather a middle-class project. But anyway, we make use of the city in a different way than only letting the cars drive around. So that's what I wanted to show you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Mr. Schicker, thank you for your speech. And finally, Ella von der Heide, researcher in the Department of Open Space Planning on Urban Gardening and Urban Food Governance, University of Kassel. Please, Ms. von der Heide, give your talk.
Thank you. So, thank you very much for inviting me again. Good to see some of you again after the workshop in Munich 3 years ago. And I'm very impressed with what you have achieved in the last 2 years. It's nice to see the output. I would like to point out that I'm not only a researcher at the University of Kassel, but I'm also an active community gardener, an activist for urban gardening, and a documentary filmmaker. And maybe you're interested in checking out my films. I have made a series of films on community gardens in Germany, the US, Argentina, South Africa. And in these films, I'm focusing to give the gardeners a voice and to help them explain how their gardens are connected to social projects and social justice and ecological justice projects. And that might be interesting. It's very often vulnerable groups explaining how they are active and what role the gardens are playing in their activities. Today, I have been asked to talk about urban community gardens as instruments for participatory bottom-up city planning. And my itinerary for today is to go with a short background. I think I'm going to cut that one. And then present you with a lot of examples from bottom-up participation, top-down, and then the challenges that I have witnessed in these 15 years that I am in the field. So, the background, I wanted to refer to the reference framework for sustainable cities with its 5-dimension and 30 objectives, which I find quite helpful. The dimension I would focus on is number 10, increase of citizen participation, and that's the whole section, and I have cut out these 3 sentences there, which are summarizing what are the challenges And I think that the community gardens, I'm not going to read that to you, I think the presentation, you probably all know it. The community gardens are giving answers to the challenges that are being presented here. It's an instrument to get the opinion of every group of people concerned. They can empower and encourage citizens to participate, and they can help to form long-term strategies and to do this in a structured way and build relationships. But now to the examples. I will start with bottom-up participation, and since the type of urban gardening that I am connected to mostly is a bottom-up or grassroots movement, this section will have the most examples. During the last talks, I realized that I do come maybe from a slightly different experience. I'm an urban planner, and I sometimes work top-down approaches. But in most of the countries that I've been working, living, and researching in, like Germany, US, England, South Africa, and Argentina, urban agriculture is a true grassroots movement. And what usually happens is that people engage in an urban garden or start an urban garden, and very often the people who are starting garden are members of vulnerable groups themselves, and I'm going to show you some examples. So my talk is a lot of examples. And there is no NGO or non-profit organization standing between the gardens and the government. And sometimes a non-profit organization is formed later in the process of saving the garden or around land struggles, and I will talk about this. So I think that I do have this a little bit different background. I'm not sure why that is, and maybe there could be more connection, and we could talk a little bit more about this. I think I have other experiences that might be interesting. Okay, let's start with the bottom up. I have 3 chapters there, activation and empowerment. And I have 8 points in the first chapter. This is one of the 500 intercultural community gardens in Germany. And community gardens here work excellent in integration and inclusion. We have heard that before, and there's long experience now in Germany. And in these gardens, Germans and migrants, newcomers are working together, and it's kind of the first step to integrate the newcomers into the local planning system. Another example from Munich. I think you visited that garden. General, a community garden is a place to get to know your neighbors and start to discuss local problems that might be planning issues. Through the discussion, people can learn to express collective ideas and learn language of planning. For example, in this community garden in Hamburg, someone wrote the term respect the commons on a raised bed and therefore established a discussion around commons and commoning, which is a very theoretical discussion, and it's happening in the garden. I have been there. Participants in community gardens do learn to organize a group, but also group events. That's an example from a Berlin community garden. They learn to relate to environmental and social issues and to build solidarity. And resources are created in the garden that to free the time for the gardeners themselves to be able to participate. Very important is that the feeling that one can produce something and is a valuable member in the society empowers people to engage in public dialogue. And especially if there is a conflict about the gardening space, and that very often happens, people learn quickly how to articulate their ideas, Here, for example, in a creative demonstration together with the plants in Hamburg, or here in Berlin, it's all the plants on the street, they had to move, and they made a demonstration out of that. That's the same one in Berlin. Out of this local engagement, larger citywide ideas can be formed to engage in the development of the city. This, for example, is the Right to the City movement in Hamburg. That has its roots in the community gardens in Hamburg. That's an initiative in Berlin where bottom-up groups and grassroots formed a new association to think about the city in a new way and to policies around land use and public land. It's been very controversial, and it did have influence. It's true bottom-up participation. And this is a very new movement in Germany, which I think is very exciting. In the last 2 years, 30 food policy councils have been formed or are forming right now. Many of these food policy councils are coming from the community garden movement. It's really the next step. It's kind of a similar development that we have seen in the US. And they try to influence city policies around food questions, social justice, ecological justice, food sovereignty. And there have been now some national meetings, and it's a very inspiring meeting atmosphere there. And sometimes they're embraced by the local policy makers, and sometimes not, but it's really a participation that comes from the bottom. Chapter number 2 I call placemaking, and I will show you examples of how community gardeners learn to create the actual garden, and from that they develop abilities that enable them to start to engage in urban planning. So first step is to plan the project in a group. Secondly, they learn how to draw and read maps. That's a map of a community garden in Berlin. They learn how to take a space and to allow themselves to be part of the city design. They learn to design the space according to their needs and to maintain the space. And very importantly, one of the main skills of our times is they're building soil. And they're collecting knowledge about climate, soil, plants, animal, insects, other uses of the cities, which are all important actors in the city. And we haven't talked about these vulnerable groups of actors in the city that we maybe should include in our city planning. Third chapter, they get in contact with the planning system. And there are many different reasons to get in contact. Sometimes they have to secure the place. And in this example, for example, in Munich, community gardens had to learn how to draw their garden into a legal building plan. And I think there was a lot of knowledge acquired in this process. Or they have to integrate their garden into a public program to get funding. And by that, connect with the city. This is, for example, a guerrilla gardening movement in Munich that I was part of 10 years ago, and then the city invited us to become part of their their formal program, so we wouldn't just be in the media all the time if we have a new plantation somewhere. And sometimes the gardens are the places to get to know the planners in person and find out that they are not so scary people. Slowly, the gardeners usually do understand the logic of urban planning and sometimes start to write development plans themselves. This is a very exciting example from London, where many grassroots movements or grassroots groups, many of them also gardens, wrote this community-led plan for London only a couple of years ago. And people start to think outside of their box and become aware of other uses of the land. This is a bottom-up mapping process that I showed you also in the workshop, I think 2 years ago in Berlin, where community gardens mapped other community gardeners, and really a lot of knowledge was gathered. When planners use urban gardens as intentional instruments to get people to participate in the design of the city, they have basically two goals, and there are more goals. Of course, one is to invite the people that they would usually not meet in our standard participation process. And the advantage of community gardens as instruments is that they're really easy to engage in and very little knowledge is needed. This is the example from Hamburg again with the comments. And you see people that can just hang out there and sit there and under a roof in a public space. Planners build long-term relationship with the gardeners. This is Leipzig. And can experience a space in all its social and ecological dimensions. It's a rooftop garden in Berlin. The second goal in using the garden as a top-down instrument is to create a physical demonstration of future projects that is more accessible than just a map or a plan online. That's a nice project in Hamburg, where very young people are building a model of their own neighborhood collectively again and again every year since, I think, roughly 10 years. It's a wonderful example of how to engage children into a planning process. This is a garden in Cologne in an area that undergoes reconstruction. And this garden draws the potential future inhabitants into the area already. And I will come to an ambivalent project. This is London King's Cross. It's a development project there, a huge project in a city development. Planners did invite community gardeners into the area while there still was construction site to contact the locals, to attract the future users, and to create a social network in the area already for the newcomers. But, and we're jumping to challenges now, that can also be seen as an appropriation of an urban garden by the investors to greenwash the gentrification process they are causing. And that creates a real credibility problem for the gardeners themselves, but also for the planners involved. That's another few there also. Another challenge is that the integration of a garden into urban planning can create too much pressure for the garden and overload the gardeners. We've seen this, for example, in Berlin. The gardeners do get too much attention through media, for example, and people are getting burned. Planners have to find a limit there and really listen carefully to the groups and maybe even protect the garden from this, in this case, international attention. And another process that needs attention is if the garden was built to get into contact with the different groups in an area, this needs to be monitored. This is a garden in Alania in Munich, in the south of Germany. And this garden for a while was dominated by just one group, which created exclusion of other groups. So they started a process of diversifying again, and it worked. And now it's a very diverse garden again with all the advantages. And they actually split off another part, or found another parcel, another land where the old group could garden. So they have now both, which is nice. So thank you for your attention. And I'm looking forward to answer questions, probably via email, because I'm not here for much longer. And I hope that I showed you that I think, from my experience, that there are more positive aspects and that the challenges can be dealt with. Thank you.
Ms. von der Heide, thank you for your colorful lecture. Dear guests, now we would like to welcome you for lunch in the hall, and the conference will continue at 2 o'clock. We kindly ask you to be back in time. Enjoy your meal.